we go. Hello, my name is Mrs. Gonzalez. I'm the orchestra director here at John Jay High School. This is actually, I think, almost my 10th, this is my 10th year at John Jay. And before that, I was 8 years over at Rayburn, so I'm very happy to be here in this community. I love it here. I spent almost my entire career here, so I'm so pleased to have our Rayburn Jones future Mustangs here with us today, and all of you with our traditional outdoor in the patio concerts. We have a really special treat for you tonight. The kids have come up with a great theme all about dreams, and we have lots of our officers who've really pitched in with the theme, with our narration, with all of these things. You may be asking, why are there capybaras all around? Well, that is a funny story. Thanks to Miss Haley Gonzalez, who has since graduated, it's become a thing at John Jay, and we have lots of capybaras all in the orchestra room, and they all insisted that was part of our theme this year. You saw our shirts. So that is why you're going to find out more about them soon. But before we do that, I want to first have all the John Jay officers please stand up and get a round of applause for all of our officers. A really special announcement. We just, for the high school, had our all-region auditions a couple weeks ago. And we have a lot of our members who actually made the all-region orchestra at high school. For those who don't know, they play the all-state etudes. It's pretty hard. It's a lot of work. And I'm proud of all the kids who just auditioned. It was a big step. But especially these students, please stand up. We have Marco, who's second violin in the concert orchestra. Shuhei, first violin in the concert orchestra. We have Gabe, viola in the concert orchestra. We have Kyle, bass in the concert orchestra. We have Kaden in the concert orchestra. We have Nayeli in the Philharmonic viola. We have Lucas, Philharmonic viola, and we have Emma as well. So please round of applause for all of these music. One more thing. Before we move on, I have a very, very special presentation, and they didn't know if this is going to happen, but it's happening. We love our seniors, and we want to give them a little something. So when I call up your name, stand up, and I'm going to pass you your sign. This has been a tradition since you know when, but we do it every year now, and this is for them to display proudly in their front yard. First is for Timothy Rios, our pianist. Miss Emma Sines, our violist. Lucas Alwan, another violist. Kyle Jackson, our bass player. Audrey Hendrickson, who couldn't be with us tonight, so I went for Audrey. Johnson, our violinist. Robert Tavares, a bass player. Nathan Longoria, another bass player. Here's Shuhei. His partner in crime is Genesis. And his other partner in crime, Ethan. All round of applause for all of our seniors, please.
Hello, welcome ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we shall regale you all with a quite fantastical story about a capybara named Florence Snickerdoodle Quantavius XVII diminished. It all began one ordinary night when Florence was just getting ready to fall asleep. After a long day of practicing her kazoo with the orchestra, she was very tired, but couldn't fall asleep. So she put a record onto her gramophone and got into bed, hoping that her favorite lullaby by Brian Bondlages would help her drift off to sleep.
Suddenly awoken by a strange noise, Florence jolted up in bed and looked around her dark room. As she steps out of bed and creeps through her shadowy house, peeking anxiously around every corner. Florence hears odd sounds coming from just outside her front door. As she reached it, she mustered all of her courage and threw the door open, revealing an unexpected sight. Rather than seeing her front yard at 7611 Marbach Road, Florence saw a massive forest extending for miles in every direction at the bottom of a tall cliff that her house was perched on. Even more shocking than this was the bright stage-colored sun hanging in the sky despite it being the dread of the night, outlining newly appeared trees below in a golden light.
Unable to ignore her curiosity, Florence began working her way down into the forest below. As she proceeded through the trees, the sun began to dip below the horizon and caused the forest to darken. Florence continued nonetheless, but as she worked her way deeper into the woods, she began to get an ominous feeling, like something was watching her from the shadows. Suddenly, terrifying dragons flew at her from the shadows, causing her to yelp in fear and run away as fast as her legs could carry her.
In the woods ahead of her, outlined in moonlight, was a huge mansion with extravagant architecture and a sticky orange light glowing from the many windows. Seeing no alternatives, Florence decided to continue onward, proceeding cautiously through the an ancient-looking front door of the house. Inside the mansion was in exceptional condition despite the exterior. With brightly lit candles and lavish decorations, Florence had absolutely no idea that it held a terrible secret.
As Florence walked through the silent and empty house, the dark corridors began to make her increasingly anxious. For ages, she wandered the winding halls aimlessly, unsure of where to go or how to get out of the house. Suddenly, the wooden floor beneath her feet creaked loudly and split, opening up a chasm beneath her as she fell hollowing into the shadow. Florence began talking to Mozart, revealed that they were both trapped inside of a dream by the evil sorcerer Steve the Frog, who had put a diabolical curse on the land. And Florence listened. Mozart described a magical artifact hidden deep within the cave, a crystal with the power to turn dreams into reality, that Steve needed to complete his master scheme. He said that if they found the Falcon Emerald before Steve, then they could use it to defeat him and escape the dream. And with that, they proceeded down into the cave in search of the emerald.
Quickly they came upon an enormous chamber, and lying on an engraved pedestal in the middle of the cavern was a large glowing emerald that crackled with energy. Florence approached the pedestal and grabbed the artifact, lifting it over her head in triumph. Suddenly, a dark flash of energy erupted from behind. Mosey, as Steve appeared in the chamber with a spell, seeing that Florence had already taken the emerald, he scowled and disappeared in another dark flash, taking Mosey with him. Knowing that she had to rescue him from Steve, Florence used the power of the emerald to blast through the cave to the ground above, and flew across the mystical land to save Mosey.
across the mystical dreamland of the Tower of the Emerald, Florence began to approach a tall, dark tower in the distance, reaching towards the sky like a black needle. Florence was certain that Steve was here. As she crashed through one of the highest windows of the tower, she saw Steve with Mosey in the middle of a circular room, a scowl on his face. Steve demanded angrily that she turn over the crystal. Otherwise, he would turn Mosey into a frog. They would never be able to go home. Florence considered his demands, but emboldened from the emerald, she prepared to fight Steve in the final epic battle for her home.
the energy from the Falcon Emerald, Florence and Steve began the battle in the room at the top of the tower. Steve blasted green lightning at Florence and Mozzi, trying to turn them both into frogs. However, because he didn't practice
world melted into a port around them, and they were both suddenly sucked through it, a wormhole back to their home world. Suddenly, Florence jolted upright in bed and wondered, had it all been a dream? All of a sudden, there were several loud knocks at the door. Florence opened it slowly, anxious of what she might see. But all there was at the door was Mosey, who only had one thing to say. Man, do I have a crazy dream to tell you about.
First off, I want to say thank you to you all, the parents, for being here and supporting your students. Our first concert of the year, especially those parents who donated decoration items, food items, and who came here early to decorate. We really, really, really appreciate you. I would like to give a round of applause to our middle school orchestra directors, Ms. Feeling and Mr. Love. Let's have the Rayburn Orchestra stand. Rayburn Orchestra stand, get your applause, Rayburn Orchestra. And then now for the Jones Orchestra, let's give them a round of applause too, please. I'd like for my third period concert orchestra to stand up. Third period concert orchestra. Round of applause for them. For the very first J concert. Our Philharmonic Orchestra, Philharmonic. And our chamber orchestra. Guild, who's always helped us. They fed all the kids today. They have our concession stand. If you're interested in volunteering in the future, make sure you talk to our John Jay Orchestra Guild officers who are back at the concession booth. And for those interested, we will be selling our shirts for more parents. If you'd like some shirts or some regular Jay shirts, information will be going home very, very soon. Please check out your programs if you didn't get one. There's some QR codes around to get a digital one with information for all of our upcoming exciting events like Black Violin on November 3rd. I'm so excited about that. As well as our winter concert, our fall party, and all those other great things coming up. So make sure you check those calendars, parents. Students are going to stack their chairs and stack their stands after they safely put away their instrument, and they cannot leave until they do that. And then my cleanup crew is going to be helping us. We have lots of sound equipment to help put away.